With mortgage rates going up, should you get an interest only or repayment mortgage in 2024? Here's an example. Let's assume you buy a property for £100,000 and you borrow 75% and you get a mortgage rate of 5% interest. That basically means you're paying 5% yearly interest. So if your loan is 75%, well, that's £75,000. And if your interest is 5%, that means your interest payments are £3,750 per year, which is £313 per month. So now if you go into a mortgage calculator, under mortgage debt, which is the amount of mortgage you're taking out, you put in £75,000. The mortgage term, you put in 30 years. The mortgage type, let's first look at the repayment mortgage. Let's put in an interest rate of 5%. And then hit calculate. Per month, you're repaying £403. That is your monthly mortgage payments. Let's first look at how a repayment mortgage works. You have years at the bottom and your debt, the amount of mortgage you have on the y-axis. A repayment mortgage is essentially when you're making your payments of £403 per month, part of that is the interest and part of that is you're essentially paying off the loan. So the red curve essentially shows how much debt, how much of your mortgage is left over the years. So when you're starting out, you owe £75,000 and in 30 years time, you don't owe anything because over those 30 years, you have repaid that loan in its entirety. You know, the reason why it sort of falls very quickly at the end is because of this. When you take out the mortgage and you owe £75,000, your monthly repayments are £403 per month. But £313 of that is essentially your interest payments because you owe 5% of the money that you borrowed. The £75,000, you owe 5% every single year. So really, from the £403, only £91 is actually going towards repaying the loan. The rest of it is just interest. However, now let's say it's been around 20 years and, you know, by paying £91 a month, every single month, your mortgage, the amount of money you still owe to the bank has come down to £30,000. If you owe the bank £30,000 and they're charging you 5% interest every single year, that's £1,500 a year, which is £125 per month. But you're still paying the bank £403 per month. But the difference now is £125 of that is your interest, and now £278 of that is the amount of money you're repaying. As the amount of money you owe to the bank gets less and less and less, your interest payments also get less because, well, technically there's less money borrowed from the bank. And so that's why towards the end of your repayment mortgage, it gets very quick and you can pay it off very, very quickly. What does that look like for an interest-only mortgage? If you go back into the calculator and you simply switch from repayment into interest-only and then click calculate, the amount of money you pay per month is £313 per month. This is how the interest-only mortgage works. Again, you have years at the bottom and you have your mortgage, the amount of debt on the y-axis. The mortgage starts from £75,000 and 30 years later, you still owe £75,000. The reason is because in this mortgage, it is interest only. If you look at it at a point in time, you owe £313 every single month. All of that is the interest. None of that is the amount of money which is being repaid to the bank. And that is the reason you have that straight line and you owe £75,000 at the start and you owe £75,000 right at the end. So the question is, why would you choose an interest-only mortgage? Well, if you look at the repayment mortgage, and let's assume this is an investment property, the repayment mortgage is £403 per month. The interest-only mortgage is £313 per month. If it's an investment property, and let's say this property rents for £600 per month, well, whether you paid £313 a month or £403 a month, in either situation, you're still making a profit. So from a profitability point of view, it doesn't really matter because in other situation, you're going to make money. But this is where it really starts to matter. This graph shows the house prices over the last 15 years. The prices have been going up and up and up for decades, but especially the last 15 years. Let's say you buy a property for £100,000, you get a mortgage of £75,000 and you put down £25,000 yourself. Now, over the course of the years, with a repayment mortgage, in 30 years' time, you pay that loan entirely and you don't have a mortgage. With an interest-only mortgage, in 30 years' time, you still owe £75,000. In 30 years' time, as prices continue to go up and up and up and up, whether you have paid down the loan completely and you're down to no mortgage whatsoever, or you still owe £75,000, if you bought property in an area where property prices are going to appreciate, the amount of money you're going to make is going to be significantly higher than the £75,000 you still owe to the bank. So that's why it doesn't really matter if you get an interest-only mortgage. But here's where it does matter. With a repayment mortgage, you're paying $403 a month. With an interest-only mortgage, you're paying $313 a month. The amount of difference between the two, which in this case is around £90, you want to be in a situation where you're saving that money, and you save that money in order to buy more and more and more investment properties, rather than just paying down the loan of one. Whether you pay down the loan completely or you still have the loan, If the property has gone up in value, you're still making money anyway, but you want to be in a situation where you have 1, 2, 3 properties and more properties which all go up in value, as opposed to just having one investment property and you're spending all your time and energy trying to repay that one investment property. So that is the situation you want to be in. The other issue when it comes to a repayment mortgage is the stress testing with investment properties. What that means is this. So let's say you buy a property for £100,000 and you get a mortgage of £75,000. That mortgage has to be stress tested. What that means is that the rent has to be high enough to make sure you can make the mortgage payments. And the rate at which they set the mortgage payments just for the stress testing is 5.5%. So you can get a mortgage of 4%, but the stress test is still on the 5.5%. The reason is the bank wants to make sure that if mortgage rates do go up, your rent is still high enough that it can repay the mortgage. And, recently the rates have gone up and the bank wants to make sure there isn't a repeat of 2008 where suddenly mortgages go up and everyone goes bankrupt. 5.5% of your loan of £75,000 is £4,125. Not only does the bank look at the 5.5% rate, what they also do is they want to make sure that they take the 5.5% and they add 125% buffer. Because the reality is the mortgage rates could go up, but you could also have some maintenance costs. The property could be empty for a while. The bank wants a 25% buffer in there that in case you have a few bad months, you can still continue to make the mortgage payments, rather than you have one bad month and suddenly you go bankrupt because you can no longer make the mortgage payments. So they apply a 25% buffer on top. So if you apply a 25% buffer, that means your rent has to be more than £5,156 a year, which is at least £430 per month. If you have an interest-only mortgage, that means your rent has to be more than £430 per month. But if you have a repayment mortgage, your rent has to be more than £430 per month, plus the repayment element, the amount of money you're also repaying to the bank, which is in this case £91 when the mortgage is starting out. And generally speaking, when it comes to investment properties, if you have an interest-only mortgage, the rent is normally high enough to cover the stress testing and all these premiums and everything else. But when it comes to repayment mortgages, especially with more expensive rental properties, generally the stress testing just fails, because when you combine the stress test and the amount of money you have to pay back to repay the mortgage, when you combine all of those together, normally the rent just isn't high enough in order to repay the mortgage, and so the bank will only give you an interest-only mortgage as opposed to a repayment mortgage. Now, there might be cases where you can get a repayment mortgage. I personally still don't think it's worth it, because as long as you buy in a good area, prices will appreciate anyway. But generally, for a lot of people, especially down south in the UK, you'll struggle to get a repayment mortgage on an investment property anyway because of stress testing. Now, even though I think an interest-only mortgage in 2024 is better, that is for investment properties. When it comes to residential properties, this is the property you buy in order to live in yourself. It's very hard to get an interest-only mortgage anyway because of this reason. If we go back to this graph, with an interest-only mortgage, at the end of the 30 years, you still owe £75,000. But when it's an investment property, the rent you're collecting from your tenants, that is paying your mortgage. So the bank knows that in 30 years' time, even though you still owe them £75,000, you can then just get another mortgage for another 10, 20, 30 years, and your rent is still going to be high enough in order to continue repaying that mortgage. But when it comes to a residential property, a property you're going to live in yourself, your income, your salary is a thing that is paying off the mortgage. So at the end of the 30 years, imagine you still owe £75,000, but now you might be 60 years old, you might be 70 years old, and you now no longer have an income because now you're retired. Well, then you can't repay that mortgage anymore because, well, where's that money going to come from? So generally speaking, when it comes to residential properties, you most likely have to go with a repayment mortgage because the bank wants their money back. But it doesn't matter when it's an investment property. Now, since it's much harder to get an interest-only mortgage on a residential property, that's one of the reasons I recommend to people to rent a property to live in and then use your money to buy investment properties. Now, if you want a deeper dive on whether you should buy or rent a property in 2024, then watch this video here.